Died in Libya yesterday, as did Chris Hondros, and we're also joined by Christina Larson with Foreign Policy magazine, who's worked with Chris. Christina, our condolences as well. Can you talk about Chris, his history, what he was doing in Iraq to most recently in Libya? He died next to Tim Hetherington. Tim Hetherington, when he was brought to the hospital, was already dead, and Chris Hondros died in the hospital.
Right, that's correct. Chris sustained a brain injury, and he went into a coma, and they tried to revive him, but he passed away a few hours after Tim did yesterday. Chris grew up in the small town of Fayetteville, North Carolina. He worked for a paper in North Carolina, and then in the late 90s he began freelancing in Kosovo, and really cut his teeth as sort of an act of both bravery, personal bravery, and feeling like he needed to tell this story. Somewhat similar to what we've heard about Tim. He was compelled to bring these images and these ideas to people who otherwise wouldn't see them, to whom war would seem like an abstraction. For the past decade or so, he's been a staff photographer for Getty Images. He has traveled more than a dozen times to Iraq. He's also traveled to Afghanistan. He worked side by side with Tim at some points in Liberia, Pakistan, many other places, Haiti recently. Chris also did some work outside of Getty, including a photo essay about Haiti earlier last year for Foreign Policy, and I worked with him on that. And I should say we've been friends for several years because we were both alumni of the International Reporting Project, which is a journalism fellowship based in Washington. Just to talk a little bit about Chris and his work and the person behind his work, I think his awards, being nominated for a Pulitzer, winning, as you mentioned, the Robert Capa Award, speak for themselves about the quality of his work. As an individual, he was compelled to get close to the action. Some photographers, you find ways to use long lenses to take pictures from a distance, but Chris always felt that he understood something different, and the pictures he showed expressed something different the closer he was to what was going on. Right before he fell in the mortar attack yesterday, he had sent back some really close-up shots of the rebel fighting in Libya. Chris also was someone who he was dedicated to telling stories over the long term, and that's why he kept going back to Iraq. I know that when Iraq seemed to be on the back burner of the American conscience, it was something that he kept pushing his editors at Getty to let him do, because he felt that it was really important that we see not just how something begins, but how it plays out. Another insight of Chris into his work was that he wanted to show not just the guns and mortar side of war, but how it affected the other people in war-torn places. So he did, for example, a really gorgeous photo essay for the Virginia Quarterly Review that was shots from a Humvee in Iraq of just street scenes in Baghdad. Now, this was at a time, I think these photos were taken around 2006, 2007, when foreign journalists had very limited access in Baghdad. And so the series of images was both a comment on what street life was like, but also, in that case, the sort of limited access that he had, sort of seeing things through the window of this armored vehicle. There was a real intellect and a passion behind Chris's work that I think that, combined with his courage and his technical skills, really allowed him to do fabulous things.
And people can go to our website and see his photographs at democracynow.org. We did get a chance to interview Chris Hondros on April 5th, 2007, about the award-winning photographs he took in the northwestern Iraqi city of Tal Afar in 2005. Chris was embedded with U.S. troops when they opened fire on a family of 8 approaching a checkpoint in a car. Both parents were killed while the 6 children in the back seat looked on.
I was in January of 2005, and I was embedded with U.S. Army troops in Tal Afar in northern Iraq. I had been sent there by the Army. I wanted to go to Mosul, where there were some battles going on at the time, but I'd been sort of waylaid to go to Talafar because you don't always get the embeds that you want in Iraq. And I was with a group of soldiers on a routine evening patrol around dusk, about 6 o'clock or so, right around the time where the curfew was held in Talafar. And a car on the darkened streets sort of appeared in the distance and started, coming down the boulevard toward the soldiers. As is well known, the soldiers don't like cars coming towards them. They fear suicide bombers and things. They weren't sure what to do. They fired a few shots. The car kept coming, and so they shot up the car. And tragically, a Iraqi family was in the car, parents and 6 children. And the parents were killed instantly. And I documented that event.
And then the children that came out of this car.
Well, the children, the children were, of course, terrified and, covered in the blood. It splattered in the car, and they were covered in blood. The soldiers realized the mistake immediately and rushed up, took the children out. They weren't sure who was injured, who was not, and they sort of evaluated the children on the sidewalk in front there. I photographed all that, and one of the children, it turned out, had a gunshot wound as well, and they were all transported to the local hospital and dropped off there.
Really powerful images, especially of one little girl, blood splattered all over her. And did the soldiers at all try to prevent you from taking any of those photos?
No, they didn't really. I mean, they were sort of in the moment, as so often happens in these situations. The soldier, everybody was in the moment and doing their things, and I was photographing just sort of discreetly there, just what was going on, and but they never tried to stop me in any way at the time.
Describe the little girl, this most famous image of the little girl next to a soldier's boots and weapon.
Her name, as it turns out, is Samar Hassan, and she was 5 years old at the time of the picture. And the soldiers, there weren't that many soldiers. It was just part of a platoon, maybe 5 or 6, one medic for the whole thing. So the medic was one by one trying to evaluate the children to see what sort of injuries they might have had. And Samara was there just crying, while one of the other children was being attended to. And, she's standing next to the soldier. I think one of the reasons the photo had this sort of resonance that it does, because it has a sort of empty feeling, the poor girl all alone in the world now, just standing there in the dark,
That was Chris Hondros on Democracy Now! April 5th, 2007. To see the whole interview, you can go to democracynow.org. As